Hello, this is Bobby Grow. Welcome to another Always Reforming podcast. This podcast will be a little different. I'm just going to give a recounting of an angel experience that I had when I had a terminal incurable cancer known as desmoplastic small round cell tumor, or DSRCT sarcoma. I was diagnosed with this back in, late 2009 and early 2010. So that's what this podcast will be about. It's going to be, I always say it's going to be brief. I'm not sure how short this will be or how long it will be. So we'll just see how it goes. I don't intend on it being too long. I just want to give a verbal account of this experience that I had, that my wife and I had, as I was entering the day before I started my cancer treatment. But before I give that story, I want to give a little bit of background to provide the context for this encounter that we had with the Lord, really, with a messenger from the Lord. That's what an angel is, literally. And so let's get this started. So like I just said, let me start out with how it all started for me. The whole cancer story. So one night, in the middle of the night, in June-ish, 2009, so in the summertime, I woke up in the middle of the night with really, really bad gas pains, like I've never had before. And it wouldn't go away for like 2 or 3 hours. I couldn't sleep. I was just in a lot of pain. I finally did go back to sleep. I woke up the next morning and I still had a little twinge of pain in my abdomen, just on my right side. But it wasn't terrible pain, and it wasn't the gas anymore. It didn't seem like. So I just figured I had pulled a muscle or something at work or something like that. So I just thought, okay, it will go away eventually. But that pain over the next few months began to worsen a little bit, and it started to radiate towards my groin area. And so I thought that I probably had a hernia. And so I went and saw my family doctor, general practitioner. I rarely went to the doctor at that point. And so it was just this old guy who's about to retire. And I just told him my symptoms, really. He didn't even do a physical. He didn't feel me or anything to see if he could feel a hernia or something like that. He just went off of what I told him as far as my symptoms and what I thought, basically. And so he just concluded that, yeah, it's most likely a hernia, and you can live with it, until it's unbearable as far as pain or things like that. And then we could do surgery. So maybe another couple years. But the pain continued to worsen. I wasn't really impressed with the way he handled it. And so I looked up a hernia specialist. And so I found one at another clinic hospital. And so I went there, and he actually did a physical, and he said he didn't feel a hernia. And so he ordered a CT scan. And so I went about a week later or so, I guess, after that exam with him. And I went to the imaging center, and then that was the day really that began the process. It began. It changed my whole world at that point, although I didn't know that for sure yet either. But what happened is I had the CT scan. I did the scan of my abdomen looking for a hernia, and the CT tech, I'll never forget his whole body language when he came into me after the exam just changed. It changed radically. He literally looked pale, like white and afraid. So of course that scared me to death too. He brought me out. I said, "What's going on? What's there's something wrong? What's going?" He's like, I can't talk about it, but we've been on the phone now with your doctor, and he's ordered an emergency testicular ultrasound. So then I thought, what's going on? Do I have cancer? What's happening here? And of course, the techs can't tell you anything for liability purposes. And so, because they're not, they know what they're looking at isn't good, of course, but they can't read it per se. And even if they can, at a level, they can't tell you. So he couldn't tell me anything. We did this emergency testicular ultrasound, and that was it. They couldn't tell me anything, so I went home. I was terrified. But then my doctor, I called him, of course, right away, asking him what was going on, and they said, well, there's just some irregularities that they saw, some abnormality. And but because they didn't get us in immediately, they didn't get me into the office immediately. That they made another appointment with me for like about a week or so away from that. My wife and I just convinced ourselves, okay, well, it can't be that serious, because they aren't, they aren't acting like it's an emergency situation. They aren't getting us back into the office. So we convinced ourselves that it must just be like a really bad hernia or something else like that, but not some life-altering, threatening disease or something like cancer. So we talked that away. And so I finally go back to him for the appointment, and the doctor, I went in by myself, because we had convinced ourselves, my wife and I, that it wasn't, it couldn't be that serious. So I went in by myself. My wife and kids, they drove to her in-laws, or not her in-laws, her parents, my in-laws, about 2 hours away. We were going into a weekend, and so we were just going to hang out there for the weekend. And so I went to his office by myself, and his body language also was telling. He had me sit down. He came into the exam room. He sat down. He looked at me, face to face, eye to eye, and he just said that they found a large mass by your right kidney. When he said that, my head literally spun, and didn't stop. Everything that you could imagine, getting news like that. My stomach literally dropped. I think I had more than a panic attack. All of that happened at once. And the first question I asked him was, "Am I going to die?" And he said, "You're not going to die." But of course he didn't. That was just, bedside manner. He didn't know what it was. I said, Is it cancer for sure? He says it does look cancerous. He says we don't know that for sure, but it has the characteristics of a cancerous mass. And so, that, of course, was life-changing. That moment in itself was life-altering and changing. And so I left just in utter shock. I called my wife. I called my parents. And I was terrified. I drove to be with my wife and kids at her parents'. And, we just cried and were afraid and didn't know what to do. But we had to wait now for the biopsy. The doctor did leave me with the idea that it could be a benign, mass. And so, of course, we gravitated towards that too. So we were just trying to encourage ourselves, of course, and waiting until we had the biopsy. So they ordered a needle CT-guided biopsy of this mass. And that happened, I guess, about longer than I would have thought it would take to do that. I think that happened about another couple weeks after we found out I had this mass. It seemed like it was it took forever for us to get there. So we did that. And then we waited another 3 weeks or so. Just a torturous time to find out what's going on here. What is it? What's going on? And so the doctor finally called with results, and they had already run it through, I think. Well, no, at that point they'd only run it through one radiologist, I think, office. And so he brought me in, had me come in. This time, of course, my wife, Angela, came with me. And he said, well, it's not good news, but it's not the worst news. It's not terrible news. So the initial diagnosis was that I had non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, but that it was in the treatable, curable category. So that seemed, relatively speaking, that was encouraging. I mean, if it wasn't going to be benign, at least it was in the treatable, curable category. But they weren't sure. For sure. He said, we're going to have this read by a couple other labs, some other radiologists too. So they did that. And so we waited another couple weeks, but now, of course, we're somewhat relatively encouraged, because it sounds like, okay, it's not good, but we can treat it, and I'm not going to die, per se, here. So, from this. So, but then we go another couple of weeks. I'm at home, get the phone call from them. And this time they just tell me on the phone that it's not lymphoma, unfortunately, that it's a rare sarcoma. And then they made another appointment with me. We went in pretty quickly that time, like the next day. And he told us, he sat us down. He said, unfortunately, this is called, it's called desmoplastic small round cell tumor, a sarcoma, which is a rare, very rare sarcoma. He didn't say what I'm going to say here, what we'd find out though later. It's a very rare cancer. It's not in the treatable, curable category like the lymphoma was, per se. Of course, he didn't leave us with that. I mean, he was a pretty good doctor that way, as far as providing some hope still, even when he knew it wasn't very hopeful. But so he said, yeah, it's and so he's a surgeon. That doctor was a surgeon. He specialized in abdominal stuff and like hernias. But so he was willing to do the treatment, like surgery, and work with a oncologist friend of his. But okay, so once we found out what I had, and how rare it was, how deadly it was, how untreatable it was, how there was no protocol for it, how the prognosis was, you might live there's a 5 to 10% chance, maybe 15% chance that you'll survive this up to 5 years. That was the prognosis. That was terrifying, of course. And so, we went home. We gathered ourselves as much as possible, praying. Had our family praying. My brother-in-law was doing some research for us, trying to figure out, if there's any treatment centers local that would be better to go through than this surgeon, who wasn't really a specialist or even an oncologist. He's not an oncologist. So what he found, and what my wife also found independent of him, was at OHSU. We live in the Pacific Northwest, so OHSU, Oregon Health and Sciences University. So it's a university hospital, and a really good one, actually, as far as hospitals go. Actually had a sarcoma center, and had the only sarcoma center on the West Coast, basically. And so I think Seattle does do that as well. The hospital there, I forget the name of it. It's a pretty famous hospital too. But so that was a blessing, and so we read the reviews even of that situation there and how they worked. And so my wife called OHSU as the Night Cancer Institute there, and she told them the kind of cancer I had been diagnosed with. And the second that they heard what I was diagnosed with, they made an appointment. Man, I'm actually getting emotional recounting this. It's kind of like post-traumatic stress here, I think, recalling this like this. They got us in the next day. So that told us this is serious, really, really serious. So we were in there the next day. We were encouraged that we had found a place like this. It had great reviews where, people were contacting us that we knew who had heard good things about it. And, people who had friends or they themselves who had like sarcomas, not the kind I had, but sarcomas, and how well they'd been treated there. And so that was, we were encouraged just to be in good hands. And we really felt that the Lord had led us there, and He did. And so we met with the medical oncologist there. He came in, Dr. Chris Ryan, and he talked to us about it, about the cancer, about just what it looked like from his eye. And thankfully, mine had stayed local. Typically, this cancer starts in the abdominal wall, and it's just metastasizes. It spreads rapidly all over, where you end up with hundreds of tumors all over your abdomen and other places. And by God's grace, mine had stayed local at that point still, and it did stay local, thankfully. And so that was good. It had infected some, lymph nodes next to the tumor itself. The tumor was by my right kidney. It wasn't in my kidney, but it was next to my right kidney. And like I said, about the size, a little bit bigger than a softball. So a good size, very good size, big tumor. And it had infected, for sure, at least one lymph node next to it in that region, along with some others. So when we heard that was a little scary. Like, okay, does that mean it's going to metastasize through the lymphatic system? We didn't know, but he said he said that all things considered, all things being equal, that it's good that it hadn't spread yet. So that was encouraging there. And then we met with later. So the way that they operate there, they have their whole team to get there, like they work seamlessly. So you don't have to go to different offices or anything like that. So you have the medical oncologist, the surgical oncologist, the pharmaceutical oncologist, the whole team is there, and they just collaborate together like immediately that way. And that's what was happening that day. So we were there for a total of about 4 or 5 hours that day. And so we met with this guy, with a surgical oncologist, and man, his name was Dr. Kevin Billingsley, and he was the head of surgical oncology there at the Night Cancer Institute. And also he does work in New York at the Sloan Kettering Cancer Institute there. And he was amazing. So, it had already been a few hours when we finally met him. He'd been consulting with Dr. Ryan, and they've been already trying to put together a treatment plan for me. And so he came in and like I said, it's a university setting. So he actually had an intern, I guess, with him, somebody doing their internship with him. So I was already a doctor, but now specializing. And he sat down. His bedside manner was absolutely amazing. Like, he made me cry. Because we didn't know still, neither did the medical oncologist, because he had to talk to this guy, to the surgical oncologist, and look at my scan and stuff. We didn't know if it was going to be operable. I mean, that was the key thing. Is it going to be operable? So we still had this anxiety, this angst, and this anticipation about finding out, will this be operable? Because ultimately this cancer is a surgical cancer. They use chemo and radiation in some cases to debulk the cancer prior to the resection surgery itself, where they actually go in and take out the tumor or tumors or whatever. So we didn't know, but he comes in. It's already gotten dark outside. We started this whole process in early afternoon. It's dark out now in the evening. He just sat down and he just sat there. He wanted us to tell him, like what I'm telling you guys right now in this podcast, about how the whole process had been unfolding, what our fears and anxieties were, what we were thinking. And then he kind of just looked at me, and I just said, I'd asked him, so is it going to be operable? And he just kind of looked at me and my wife. He got down at our level, sat on a little stool, looked at me eye to eye, kind of cocked his head as he was listening to us intently. And you could tell that he really cared. He really projected that well. And he just said, Bobby, Angela, I want you to know this is operable. And we're going to do all that we can to take care of this. And of course, I broke down and cried because of all the stress of it. And I still have those feelings now as I think about this. So we left there that night, drove home, so encouraged by just feeling like, okay, at least we know what is going on now. We know what this is. And we left knowing that we had a team of the best doctors on our side, and knowing that the Lord had providentially put that all together for us. And so there was real hope brought there that evening, that day, just meeting with that team there. And the process really began at that point. And so they told us we're going to start chemo. And they used, let's see here, the Ewing's sarcoma the Ewing sarcoma protocol, which is kind of a close cousin cancer, to as close as you can get anyway, to the DSRCT that I had. And it's the hardest chemo you can get. It's inpatient, 2 different kinds of cycles that you do. And it's just terrible. It turned out to be terrible for me. I almost died from that multiple times. I had lots of blood transfusions, all kinds of sores throughout my body. The pain, I was on morphine, all kinds of stuff. I'm not going to get into all of that stuff. But that turned out to be terrible. Of course, I lose every little hair on my body all over, everywhere. And just all kinds of stuff. I was hospitalized over and over again after the chemo each time. Anyway, but we didn't know that then. We just knew, we were thankful that, okay, we can get started here. There's going to be treatment. And so we had that meeting. It was, this is right after Thanksgiving, 2009, right before December. So I think my first chemo was going to be scheduled for December 2nd or 3rd. And so I had to have a procedure done before that, where I had a port put into my chest where the chemo would be delivered through. So that was in lieu of a PICC line, which the port was really a gift that way, because PICC lines, I ended up getting a PICC line later because that port eventually got a blockage. But PICC lines suck. But that port was good, a good mechanism for reception of the chemo. So I went and did that. But so I did that. I think I did that the next day or something after that meeting with them, right away. It was time to get a move on, right away. It's a serious cancer, and that's how they treated it. So we did that. And I say all of this just to get to this angel experience. What I hadn't said yet, through this whole process, knowing I had a mass, waiting for the results of the biopsy, the Lord just really began to speak to my heart. And even before we knew it was deadly cancer, the Lord was speaking to my heart, and I didn't even really identify it as a scripture passage per se, but I finally did. He just was speaking to my heart right away that this sickness is not unto death. This sickness is not unto death, Bobby. He just kept reassuring me with that because I was terrified. And, and that turned out to be John 11:4 in the Lazarus story. And so I have the Lord's working, okay? That's what I'm wanting to say here. That he's working in the midst of all of this. And so we are now the day before I'm going to go in for my first inpatient chemo treatment, which I'd be there for 48 hours for that one. And so it's the day before that, and I'm scheduled. I had to go in, Angela and myself, my wife and I, had to go to the hospital they wanted me to do a PET scan. And my oncologist, my medical oncologist, he calls that like a voodoo medicine, because PET scans are notoriously present like kind of false positives because of the way the signatures it uses, basically like sugar. Like if you have high concentrations of sugar, the dye and everything will concentrate in those areas and pick that up and make it look like there's something there when actually there's not. So, but he was just doing that because that's kind of what you do for, just to make sure you're covering all the bases. So anyway, this was the day before I was going to start my chemo. We go into the hospital, but we get lost. It's a big hospital, and they were doing construction on it. And it seemed like we were going to miss my appointment. We were getting close to my time. So, of course, we were stressed about everything, and that didn't help. We ended up getting on the wrong elevator, ended up on a floor where there was nobody. They were doing construction. I don't even know how the elevator was open to get us to that point, but we got to a floor where there's just a construction site up there. But there was this lady. It was weird. There was this lady there, and we didn't know what to do. We were stressed, and she was just like this nice middle-aged lady wearing like a suit type thing, skirt, suit, set up. And she just said, "Can I help you guys?" And we're like, "Yeah, we don't know. I had this appointment, and for a PET scan, we're lost. We don't know how to get there. We don't know what to do." So she said, "Well, I'll show you." So she got in an elevator with us. She was just really nice, and she just walked us right to where we needed to go. And I didn't really think of that necessarily as an angel per se at that point until later, in light of the whole experience of that day. So we go to have the PET scan. I was scared to do that because I'm kind of claustrophobic a little bit, and it's like you're in a tube. You are in a tube, and I was in there for like 45 minutes, and the Lord just gave me grace, and I did okay with that. I didn't panic out of there. So I did that, and now we're just stressed, but we were hungry too. So on the way home, we decided to stop at Subway, get some sandwiches. And so we were in line, and so this is definitely the angel encounter, and I believe that lady was too, in light of this as well, the whole, because she was completely out of place as well. It didn't make any sense for her to be on an empty floor construction site, just right at the elevator, right as we stepped out of the elevator. She was there, just there for some reason. Nobody else was up there. So yeah, so we're standing though in line at Subway, waiting to get our sandwiches built by the sandwich artists. And we're waiting, and this guy comes in. He's probably like, I don't know, 6'7", 6'6" or 6'7". Like, I'm 6'3". So he was taller than me. He was 6'7", I'd say, at least, probably. But he was like, I would say, like, he looked like he was probably like late 50s, early 60s. He kind of had he had white hair, white grayish hair, kind of unkept. And he was kind of just loud and kind of like, just kind of making a scene, it seemed like. And, I mean, not out of hand or anything. It just like drawing attention a little bit to himself. Just because he was noisy. And he was looking at the drinks and stuff in the refrigerator that they have there. And so then he comes and stands right behind me in line. And we kind of started having a little small talk about the weather, and then that led into a little discussion about where he was from, and he turned out to be like, he said he was from like Minnesota or something, and it was like a dark, dreary gray, typical fall winter Pacific Northwest day, and it was just ugly out. So we were talking about that a little bit, and then we get, to the end of we were paying, so we were gonna leave. We paid. We were about ready to leave. I kind of look back at him just to say, bye. And he stops me though, and he looks at me, and then he just reaches out his hand to me. He shakes my hand, and as he's shaking my hand, he says, "It's nice to finally meet you." Emphasis on finally. And that really kind of threw me for a loop, because it registered right away, like what he said, when he said, as if he knew me, when he said, "finally meet you," as if he'd been with me or something, been around me before, for a long time even. And so that was crazy, and then, so we go out to the car. My wife hears him say this too. She's right there. And we kind of just look over at each other, and independent of each other, we both just got this sense, we both said at the same time, "You think that was an angel? Do you think that was an angel?" She's like, "Yeah, I think so." And I said, "I do too." I said, because I felt even encouraged by it. It was weird. It was just a weird thing. And then I'd seen the car he pulled up in out there. We were kind of next to it, and it was a white, I still remember, like a white Plymouth Acclaim, which is interesting as well. Just the idea of acclaiming and publicly, announcing. And it kind of has a biblical connotation to it as well, and even angelic. And so that's crazy. That was so crazy, driving away from there, just thinking, that's an angel right there. And the Lord sent him to minister to us and to encourage us and to let us know that he's standing with us and that he's tangibly with us. And that was at the beginning of this whole process, and it was a terrible process. And like I said, I almost died. I won't get all the gory details of the side effects from the chemo, the surgery, and everything. But it went on for almost a year, and I didn't work or anything, and I lost like 60 pounds, all kinds of crazy stuff that the Lord sustained us through. He provided for us miraculously financially. He sent an angel to our 5-year-old son at school. Our son had an angelic experience of his own during that time, where a man came up to him at recess and just encouraged him and told him that your dad is going to be okay. And that our son told us that, we asked him what this man looked like. And we didn't tell him anything about angels, or he knew really nothing about that world per se. at that age. And he said he looked like light. And so that blew our minds too. But that day, and that was a little bit after I was into the process of my treatment. My son and daughter, they were seeing how it was ravaging my body. So that was what he needed. Our son needed that. And the Lord met that need there and encouraged him. And that encouraged us too, to hear that. But after that day at Subway and meeting the guy who said, it's nice to finally meet you, that evening, and this really just solidified that to me, this was the Lord showing up in a concrete way. That evening, I'm scared. I was in shock. I lived in shock that whole time. I lived in total shock, really, that whole time. But my wife went to bed finally that evening. I was going to go to bed. And, but the Lord, it was almost like a vision. I don't know how else to describe it. It wasn't really, I don't know. It's not like I was asleep or in a trance or anything, but it was like the Lord just impressed upon me that in a way that I can't really articulate, not some weird Pentecostal thing or anything like that. We're not Pentecostals. We're not charismatics or anything like that. But it was, what came to mind for me was the story with Elijah and how the army was surrounding him and his servant. The servant was terrified. And he prayed that his servant's eyes would be opened. And that surrounding them, the servant saw the army of the Lord surrounding them, as in, as in fire. And it was as if the Lord kind of transported me into that story and assured me that yes, he had sent a ministering spirit earlier that day to us, and that he wanted us to know, wanted me to know, that he would be standing with us tangibly, concretely, and that he was right there with us. And it was as if the heavens themselves were completely open to me at that point. And I cannot describe exactly, honestly, that experience other than that way. That it was as if Jesus was in the Jordan River being baptized. And it says the heavens, they were anoigo in the Greek, which is in the present active indicative, which means that the heavens are in Jesus. For Jesus, the heavens are always actively and presently open. They're never closed. And that's what it was like. It was like the army of the Lord was surrounding us, was surrounding me. The Lord had sent a tangible representative to us in that angelic encounter, or those angelic encounters. But the one that stood out to me was the one at Subway in particular. And it's like he wanted me to know it. Yeah, that was my messenger, sent to encourage you, to minister to you, and to let you know, Bobby, that I will never leave you or forsake you, and I am with you, and that you are part of this great kingdom, and I'm with you. And that is my angel story with my cancer. And I know when I've written this out a couple times and shared it on a couple different blogs I have, and I kind of always get like a mixed response, almost no response, because I think people don't know how to interpret it or process it. It sounds strange, and we hear all kinds of crazy stuff because of the excesses of the charismatic Pentecostal movement out there that are just out. It's crazy stuff sometimes. And so unfortunately, real stuff like this gets kind of bundled in with that. And so people they're leery about this kind of stuff. But like I said, we're not charismatic. We're not Pentecostal. And yet the Lord, in that moment, where I am faced with my mortality in the most real way you possibly can be, he showed up in miraculous ways, in ways that only he could. And it was all sound. It was all sober. There was nothing sensationalistic about it. And it was all encouraging and affirming of his presence there in concrete ways. And then he continued to do, I have other things I could share in the ways that he showed up. Not always angelic. Like I said, with our son, he did have that experience himself there, thankfully. That encouraged him, and then it encouraged us in turn when he shared that with us. And just how the Lord provided for us was miraculous. I didn't work that whole year, and we had funds. We had more money with me not working that year than we did when I did work. The Lord just provided. He hooked us up with certain people who this one guy sent us a check every month, whatever we needed. My workplace raised $5,000-$6,000 for us. I mean, the Lord did amazing things, and it made me realize that, just that idea, being the provider, and that is a role the Lord gives us as a man in the home, is to be a provider, a protector, and that's a role, a legitimate role, I think, that we have as men, to lead the family that way spiritually. But what I realized, though, in that moment was that I'm not in control. I'm not providing per se at all, and that the whole wide world could just collapse, and as not a problem for the Lord at all. And there's nothing. I mean, the passage the Lord pointed me to, Jeremiah 32:17, that he is the creator and that there's nothing too difficult for him. And so that's just, this turned out, of course, as always, turned out to be really long. I only have 45 minutes for these podcasts, and I'm at 42 and a half minutes right now. So I'm going to close this. But I just wanted to share that. I wanted to verbalize it. I think it helps for you to hear me verbalize this rather than just read this, so I can provide more context, and you could just hear my voice with this and just the reality of the whole thing. Because it was a real thing. It was scary. But the Lord is faithful. He doesn't disappoint us. He'll never leave us. He'll never forsake us. And he showed up in ways that I draw off of even now. Because I dealt with anxiety, doubt and stuff, prior to that. Lots of doubt and different things. Intellectual type stuff, but with spiritual implications. And the Lord really kind of just squashed all of that through that whole year as a result of how he showed up in ways that are miraculous. There's no other way to describe it. In ways that only he could. And part of that was this angel encounter. And it's just crazy to think that potentially that angel, because apparently he finally met me, so apparently he'd been around me for quite a while. It's weird to think that ministering spirit, that angel, could be with me now, could be assigned to me now, if that's how it works. And it seems to be the way it works. So that's an amazing thing, and something to just rejoice in, to know, though, that the Lord has every resource at his fingertips. As his children, he will never leave us. He will never forsake us. And so I hope this encourages anybody who listens to this. And I hope that if you're dealing with a sickness, disease, whatever trial, that you just know that God is faithful. He will never leave you. He will never forsake you. And he has every resource at his fingertips. So God bless you.